All right, hello and welcome to the 22nd episode of the Dead Soon podcast. Today's a very exciting day because I have my first guest that I am meeting for the first time today as of the interview, because my previous ones have been either sort of like family or professors that I had or like even my boss from last semester. So I'll do a little introduction before she gives herself a little bit more of an introduction. So Dr. Awais is a licensed creative arts therapist and has 25 years of clinical experience working in nonprofit, public schools, and medical rehab centers. She now teaches in the psychology department at Marist University. So hello and welcome. And if you have anything to add to that, sort of giving your little introduction.
No, that's great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Perfect. And then, so like I said, it is exciting because this is the first time I've had someone that I'm interviewed or like that I've met for today. So it's just very cool. But I feel like this is a big step. And this was from Dr. Blumenthal, who was, I believe, like the 17th episode. We talked about sleep and sort of her profession. So it's exciting. She referred me to a couple of different professors, and I'd just been reaching out, and it's exciting. So in the spirit of sort of art therapy and what we'll be learning today, I'll start by sort of taking the role of the art therapist for you to start off. It's sort of like a little icebreaker. So if you had to artistically portray how you're feeling walking into this interview and sort of just like now, what would that feel like?
I'm thinking of when you put ink on a paper, and you just fold in half, squish it together, and you open it up. You're like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I'm feeling. So
Okay.
Open to whatever happens. I'm open to something beautiful coming out of it, and also open to the unexpected.
Awesome. I like that. I knew that you would give me an answer that would be very like not expected. So I like that. That was a good answer. I like that a lot. And sort of just because you have a lot of like history and background. So sort of like what drew you into this field, and then maybe giving like a brief sort of like career trajectory and stuff would be great.
Sure. So how I got into art therapy was I originally studied art. I got my BFA in photography and printmaking. And the idea of being an artist in a studio was not appealing to me. I loved being an artist in the studio, but after graduating, which is something that we've been talking about, it's like, what do you do when you graduate? And I couldn't imagine making art by myself. I couldn't imagine teaching other students to become artists to work in a studio by themselves. I really liked making art with other people and the idea of how people interact with art making. So in my junior year of art school, I did a collaborative project with a writer and with a graphic designer. And the three of us, and I was a photo student, and the three of us came up with this project to do a photo documentary project at the local county jail. And doing that project completely hooked me. And I'm like, I want to work in a prison. So my senior thesis was photographing men at a medium security facility in upstate New York. So from there, I was like, I think I want to be an art therapist. I love, not that what I was doing was art therapy, but I loved making art with people, and I liked having them interact with the photographs I was making. So since I was an art student, in my narrow view as a young 20-something-year-old person, I thought if I want to be an art therapist, I have to go to art school, because that's how I think about art therapy. Like the art comes first. So at that time when I went to school, there were only two schools available. That was Pratt Institute in New York and the Art Institute of Chicago in Chicago. And I told them both, I want to work in a prison. And at Cook County, at the Art Institute of Chicago, they had a partnership with Cook County Jail. And they said, we already have an internship for you if that's what you're interested in doing. So I'm like, okay. And that's how it happened. That's how I got into art therapy. The idea of making art not just for myself or just a viewer who you never get to meet, but making art with other people.
That is very cool. That's an awesome sort of like introduction, and like that it has like another layer to it with like the prison part. That's very interesting. So in practice, like what I sort of, for somebody understanding the field, how does creating something, like, no matter, like, even like you said, like, just like folding the pieces of paper together and creating something, like, how does that unlock emotions that, like, and insights that words can't? Like, why, basically, kind of, why does art therapy exist, and like, why does it work?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really complicated, right? Because there's the stuff that we know and feel, like you were saying about how my answer was unexpected, right? So that's like more of a feeling, rather than there's stuff that's really studied in terms of how art changes our brains, how it changes our emotions and feelings, and how that is studied through different hormones and different states, states that we have. So I will speak more about the emotional side, and rather than how we track this neurologically. So it changes us because art also there's a lot of sensory components to it. There's memory. There's also, when we make art, there's different tactile things. Like if you draw with a pencil versus if you finger paint or use clay, if you use those Mr. Sketch markers that have a smell, like all these different things elicit different, sometimes memories and different senses. And that also impacts what we do. Obviously not for all cultures, but in the United States and for, I guess, our contemporary culture, words are often prioritized. Words often have more meaning than feelings or memories or other states. So making art also helps us to pay attention to those things. Sometimes in therapy, and again, these are all generalizations, not true for everybody, but sometimes someone can go to therapy and they know what they're supposed to say because we're so used to words. We're surrounded by it. When you talk to therapists or case managers who's been doing the work for a long time and they see kind of repeat clients, the clients know what to say because they've been through the system for so long. And which is fine, but then also, does that mean, are people getting the same benefit? Whereas when we make art, and this is for visual art, but this can also come into play with music and dance and drama, is that some of us are taught the arts when we're young. Of course, with budget cuts and everything, some of us are never taught art at all. But for many people in the US, you're taught art at a young age, and it's encouraged and praised. And then at some point, you're told it's not necessary, that it's frivolous, that it's not going to make you money, and it's not necessary. And
it sort of becomes like an elective, a lot of cases where it's optional.
Exactly. And then when it becomes an elective, one, it can cost money, depending on where you live, right? So it can cost money, or it costs time, right? So I even think of, students here, if it's not going to count for something, then why should I do it? Even though it may count for you feeling better about yourself, it may count for you having a more well-rounded view of the world or of other people, but it's like, what does it count for? So the idea of art therapy is it's accessing different parts of our brain that often don't get utilized and sometimes are actually squashed and turned off. And that can help with if there's any repressed memories or trauma or other things that we don't want to talk about, the art can help us talk about things in different ways.
And I mean, I know in my little bit of I tried to do a little bit of just background research on you and find some stuff that you'd written or spoken on. And there was an article, and it was sort of you talking about how it was a boy who had struggled with conventional therapy, and then the art therapy sort of helped exploring emotions and experiences from a distance. Does art therapy tend to be a lot more effective on children, or is that what is your experience with that? And maybe just, you don't have to obviously speak specifically on anything, but just that sort of idea.
Yeah, actually, art therapy is used with all different populations. I have more experience working with adults than with kids, but art therapy is used a lot with children and also people who are nonverbal, because sometimes it's just an easier language to access. However, I would say art therapy is not exclusive to kids.
Okay.
And I think that's true because, as I was saying before, as adults, we are told not to use the arts. So it's a time that you could be a little bit more free. You can make more mistakes. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to say the right thing. Like right now, I'm very nervous about saying the right thing because I'm being recorded, and words mean something different than if you're not a professional artist and you're making art to share your emotions.
I guess the idea also of like the art can sometimes feel a little bit lower stakes and there's less pressure, and it's sort of like you can interpret it however you want. Where like you said, like you could say, like if you're just speaking a sentence on this podcast and you use one different word than another word, everybody has their different sort of perception around that word. They have their different history around that word. Everybody can sort of, there's a lot of words that like have like 10 different meanings that you can slightly be different just on how you say it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then if you're sort of talking about like, I'm not sure how it works for you, but like, so you have like sort of like a private practice and you have clients. Is that how it's structured for you?
Yeah. So my full-time work is here at Marist, but I do have clients, a few clients that I see privately, and most of my practice involves supervision. And that is the practice of working with professional therapists so they can continue to do their work effectively. So I supervise professionals in New York State and in Maryland.
Okay, interesting. And so in like an art therapy session, like if someone's starting brand new with a client, like how does that even start? Like what does the process look like on that like first meeting? Because I've done a little bit of like regular therapy, and it's been very like sort of like, oh, you're just like, they'll just ask you, like, I feel like a lot of therapists have like those like baseline questions that they'll ask you, and they're sort of just like taking notes and figuring it out. Like, what does it look like in comparison? Because most people just haven't really probably experienced art therapy, and a lot of people have experienced traditional therapy. So they might not sort of see that like direct kind of comparison.
Yeah. Well, some things are very similar in that you want to get kind of basic information. What brings you to art therapy? What other therapies have you experienced in the past? But often what I do is I make sure that the space has a lot of different kinds of materials out, so it doesn't feel very intimidating. So there isn't one way of making art. When I've done intakes with clients, because sometimes clients don't necessarily come for art therapy, right? Sometimes, depending on the place, sometimes they're just coming. They just want to see a therapist and you happen to be an art therapist. And sometimes people are coming specifically for art therapy. But regardless, I try to ask somebody about what their history of art making is. Like, are there any materials that they are really drawn to? Anything they don't really like? If they've ever been in art therapy before. Just their relationship to art making. And sometimes, and again, it's always depends on the person. So I think many therapists kind of see each client as a new opportunity, right? Not the same therapy for every client. So that's the same way as I approach art therapy. So for some people, I'll ask them just to make a picture or make a piece of art about how they're coming in during the day and using any of the materials that I have. If they seem open to it. But if that seems too much, then sometimes we'll just play with materials. So if somebody's coming in, they're like, I'm interested in art therapy, but I don't really know anything about it. Haven't touched art materials in a long time, but someone told me about it, or I have a sense that'll be good for me. Sometimes I will have just people use the various materials that I have and just play with them. So use these chalk pastels and how does it feel, for them to talk about it or just experiment, and then moving down the line with different materials.
Okay. And in that sense, like this, I don't want this to sound dumb from my perspective, but like when you're sort of in that, like getting that intro and like they're exploring and doing whatever like kind of they're drawn to, like how do you interpret those kind of things? Is it a sort of like you're able to interpret things that people do, or is it sort of like just as they're doing it, just like the act of them expressing themselves is helping in general?
Yeah, generally the way I see it is just the act of them exploring and seeing if somebody is drawn to certain types of materials, like things that are cleaner, like pencils or markers, things that don't like leave anything on their hands.
That's interesting.
If somebody's really open to more kind of fluid or looser materials like watercolors or paints, if someone wants collage materials, so I think that helps me understand in future sessions what materials to have. But also I like to think of any client is that you never know if they're going to come back the next time, even though there's an idea that they will be coming back every week. So I also think of it as, if this is going to be our only time together, is there something that are they going to enjoy this process? Are they going to learn something about themselves? But that's really the first session. After that, the way I use art making is depending on what the person is coming in for. So, for example, one client I was working with, he was in recovery and he was also on probation, and he really wanted to have a space, and he made art on his own. So he really wanted a space to be creative and to feel seen. He had police involvement. There was all sorts of stuff going on in his life, and he felt like he was being monitored all the time, because he was being monitored all the time. So by him being able to make artwork on his own was very empowering for him. And I made artwork alongside of him. And then at some points, I saw that he was talking about wanting to change some aspects in his life. So in response, then I would say, well, maybe we can look at using some different art materials, because he was gravitating towards the things he liked. So instead of saying, well, what things are you going to do to change your life? It's like, well, why don't we just do that in the art making or in the art materials? And then with those shifts, then we can see, how did that feel? Are there things that you can shift?
And sort of
outside?
getting them to, maybe because it's so intimidating, for, like you said, to like get them to be like, oh, like, what are you going to change in your life? Just being like, sort of getting them to change even something minor in like the art can sort of open their mind up to be open to change. Yeah,
absolutely. Because if you ask somebody directly, well, what do I need to change? People know what to say, I should get a job. I should drink less. I should sleep more, drink more water, be nicer to people. So we can say all those things, but then what does that really mean? Whereas if you are really like making one type of artwork all the time, and then someone says, hey, why don't you try this? And that person says, well, I can't do that. Then we can get to, what is it about?
That can kind of unlock something. Yeah.
Right. But we can do that right there together in the art materials, rather than someone saying, I'm going to do all these things in my life. And then the therapist saying, are you going to do that? That isn't really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, that, even just that, like, everything you said about the answer was so useful in helping me understand it. Just because, like, even when you said, like, people being drawn to certain, like, kind of mediums, like, that immediately spoke to me. Like, whenever I was a kid, and even now, like, occasionally when I'll do any little bit of, like, drawing or explore any art, I'm always, like, I will never use, like, color. I'm always very, like, just pencil paper. Like, I like doing that, and I'm a very, like, particular and, like, kind of, like, hyper organized person. So that's very, like, I always have been pencil. Like, even when I was a little kid, like, me and my friend, like, would make comic books together, and it was always just pencil and paper. There was never any color. And that's just such an interesting, like, little thing that I'm just like, oh, it's something I never really put any thought towards. But, like, painting, I never was like, that never really interested me remotely.
Yeah. And that's so great to know about yourself. What things are we drawn to and why? Is it about the ability to change something right away? With pencil, you can always change something easily. With paint, like, you can, but it's a lot of work. It's really different. And, that reminds me, because sometimes I've been referred clients because they are artists. So, oh, here's an artist, so you must like art therapy. And so oftentimes with people come in that way, I'm like, well, what do you normally like to do? And I might be like, okay, so if that's what your joy is, maybe we don't have to do that in therapy. We want you to be able to explore different aspects of yourself. Of course, if they want to, they can, but
if their whole life is art, then maybe they don't want to use that to express themselves.
Exactly. Or use a different type of art to express themselves. So it doesn't become like the same criticisms that I gave of verbal therapy. If you are a painter and that's your natural way of expressing yourself, you don't want to go to therapy and paint more. I mean, maybe you do, but
and obviously everybody's different, and
right.
that's probably a very interesting dynamic of like you said, getting a lot of artists forwarded to, because everyone probably immediately thinks that that's the best solution, but maybe they're better just in a traditional therapy sense, or maybe they're better in a different kind of sense.
Right.
It's definitely very interesting. And you mentioned like the prison part. Like, what was that kind of like for you? Like, what was the experience? Like, what were you actually doing in that? Like you said, like the school that you went to had that sort of internship program. Like, what did that look like?
So that was at Cook County Jail, and I was in the mental health hospital. So Cook County Jail has the largest mental health hospital in the country. I think the last time I checked, I think that's still true. So that's outside of Bellevue, outside of any other hospital, but it happens to be in a prison. And so I was only working on the psychiatric unit, not working with those on the medical side. And there, because it was a locked facility, the materials and what we could offer were very, very limited and very structured. And the other thing, though, is because there are not a lot of things offered for the inmates there, and you have to eat together, you all wear the same uniform, you have very strict rules. The art therapy was very popular. The art therapy groups were really popular because it allowed people to be creative and to make something.
Probably the only part of their life where they can sort of express their individuality even, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I did a lot of groups there, and because of the restrictions, I think this is really interesting. Like when you go to, if you've ever been to the Maker Lab at Steel Plant, or go to a really great studio, when you have lots of materials and choices, it's really great, but then sometimes it can be really intimidating. And being at the prison, you have to be very creative with the few materials that you're allowed to bring in. So that was really wonderful, being able to try to think about what can you do. Can you make collage without scissors? Can you, if you only can bring in materials that you can carry, right? Because also like you're going from different unit to different unit, like what can be really creative?
Yeah, it's very very limited form, and it's kind of, you have to be creative in the idea of even finding something creative to do.
Exactly. And at the same time, thinking about therapy, because therapy is supposed to be confidential, how do you do that when you're in a space that is literally not confidential, where there are people watching you?
There's no privacy.
All the time. There's absolutely no privacy. And in a group, you cannot guarantee privacy, especially when people's lives are at stake, when people need to make sure that the person next to them isn't being upset by what you're doing, because then you may not be safe later. So this idea of how do you make a space safe enough where people can be creative enough and explore enough and still get the benefits of therapy without making people feel vulnerable and exposed.
And were they like in these like specific sessions? Was it like would it be like a one-on-one context, or would it be sort of like a class kind of format?
I did, when I was there as an intern, we did different types. Okay. So many of the times it was large, like kind of in a group or class format, and then I did individual sessions as well.
That's very interesting. That's like another, like there's so many things, like even just from like interviewing a couple of different people, there's so many things like that you learn that I'm just like, I had no idea any of this existed. There's so much stuff that I'm just like, I would have never thought about that. Yeah. It's so interesting. Even the idea like that this type of therapy in prison is just like probably unlocks so much, because you can't be creative a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have your life's work if you keep interviewing people.
Yeah. It's true. I can keep learning. It's interesting. I mean, it's why I've been enjoying it so much. Like I do some solo ones, but like I really get the value in when I'm speaking to someone and learning something new. It's awesome. And I know you have, from my other little bits of research, I know you have a lot of expertise around like identity and therapy. So obviously we don't have to go super deep into anything. But the question that I have is, so you've done work around identity and therapy. How does race, gender, and culture show up in the sort of like therapy and healing process? Because I feel like seems, and from my perspective, it seems like it'd be so ingrained in just like everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think after looking back on it, I think that's why I was interested in working in prisons, in thinking of who is like the most marginalized group in our country. It's like, well, literally the people you lock away and you want to pretend aren't there. And I think when I was a grad student the first time around, I didn't realize that that's why I was interested in the population. I think I was just like, oh, this seems pretty, pretty interesting. And no one does this kind of work. So as I was doing that, and then of course throughout my grad school career, and then I started working mostly in New York City, realizing the disparities on who was doing the therapy and who the clients were. And seeing the racial and gender divide and culture divide was huge. Like most of the clients were marginalized people. And because I was working in mostly nonprofits where you didn't have to have health insurance and you didn't have to pay, most of the clients came from lower socioeconomic statuses. But the people who were doing the therapy or doing the work weren't always coming from those same backgrounds. And then when you look higher up, like, so whether it be in an educational institution or at a nonprofit, when you keep going higher up, the less diverse it would get. And the people at the top
it's seemingly impossible to relate to a lot of the time.
Exactly. But they're the ones who are getting the grants to do the work with certain people. They're the ones who are paying all the different, employees. So it was just really interesting. So as I was becoming more and more interested in this work, then and being a therapist, then I was like, oh, I think I need to go back to school to like learn even more. Because as a therapist, I learned about inequities and disparities, but that was always from how do you do the work? Like, how do you be culturally sensitive? Like, are you making sure that your collage materials represent all different kinds of people? Is the art table that you offer, does it go up and down to accommodate for wheelchairs? Or do you have adaptive equipment? Like, so we're thinking about culture and identity usually in those ways. Like, how do you do the therapy? And how do you be responsive? Like, how do you make sure how do you make sure your biases aren't coming up, with your clients? How can you, check in with yourself? But as I was doing this work longer, I was like, well, that's really not enough. There's bigger systems involved. And so I went back to school again, went to grad school to really look at those systems in a different way. So more than just therapist and client, but also like, who are the educators who are teaching students to become art therapists? Who are these people who want to become art therapists? Do they see a problem with the lack of diversity in art therapy? And so then I got into that. And then as I was doing that, then I continued to get more curious, and then you just end up going to school forever.
Yeah, I see a lot of degrees, a lot of school. Yeah, I think, that's definitely, it's a great point. It's that you kind of like, as you go higher up the ladder, if you're like, rather than like you said, looking at like that level of just like the therapist going higher and higher and higher into those nonprofits, like you're seeing more and more, and it shows how much work there is to be done still.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then just moving on to my next sort of concept. So this podcast, a lot of, like, I try to center around these themes of like humanity and like mortality and stuff like that. So my first question I had was, what have your clients taught you about what it means to be human?
such a great question.
Thank you.
What have my clients taught me about what it means to be human? I think being seen is a big part of being human. And this idea of making art in the presence of someone, which is like kind of the whole idea of art therapy, is very different than making art by yourself, right? Or making art by yourself and then bringing it to show it to your therapist. Like making art in the presence of someone, whether they're making art alongside you or they're watching you, is like very vulnerable, and it's really being seen. So I think that's one of the key things.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I think it's a great point. And I think it's a lot of like, even just like myself, like I've had a weird relationship with art. Like I used to find so much joy in it and sort of just not care. And it was just like, oh, it's whatever, like just doing my art, like back in art class when everyone was doing it. But then it sort of becomes this thing where you don't want other people to see the art unless it's like you think it's really good, or like people will be impressed by it. And it's like it sort of becomes this thing that like you kind of like hold yourself to a higher standard in the art making, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, that makes me think of so many other things that we feel like we have to be perfect at right from the beginning, like writing a perfect paper without thinking you have to edit it, right? You have to keep, your first draft is never going to be good. It's always after you keep writing stuff. Or my question to you about the podcast, and I was like, you're going to edit this, right? Because, and if, like, of course, like who would be just like record something and be like, here it is. And in terms of how we consume media now, especially with social media and things looking perfect, even podcasts, right? When you hear it, you're like, they're so good, not realizing all the work that went behind that. That social media is, people are putting up their best face or their best thing, and we don't see all the other stuff behind that. And making art in the presence of an art therapist is really showing like it is really the process of getting to different emotions or getting to know yourself in a different way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like just what you were saying about like that perception, like I know, like when I was first starting this podcast, it was even like I sort of just wanted to start it for a while, and then there's this quote that I really like. It's the quote of like, is like, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The next best time is now. Like I literally was just thinking about that quote yesterday, and I was just like, that was my motivation around a lot of things. Like was a motivation to start this. I was just like, obviously, if I look at like a podcast that's had like 700 episodes, I'm like, obviously when I start, it's not going to be there, but you kind of have to start it, because if you scroll back all the way to their first episode, it's going to be just as crazy or just as bad. Like nobody starts it and it's just immediately fantastic. Like I've done that with a lot of things. Like even like running, I'm huge into running. It was kind of just like that comparison, like even like the other quote of like, comparison is the thief of joy. Like all these different like quotes and like ideas make total sense, and like sort of like when you look back, align with things that you've done in your life already.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I mean, I like the what you said about like it's that you've learned that it's so important to be seen. And I know even like I'm a psychology minor, so I've taken just a couple of psychology classes, like took a child development class, and it's just interesting even like having conversations with my family about like how important like your early life is and how foundational. Like you don't realize how foundational, like even like I don't like have like any memories like from like super young, but like how foundational it was, but I don't even remember it. So it's like, I guess that's probably a part of like the art therapy, where it's like you're kind of trying to unlock those things that are in your subconscious. Yeah, it's definitely very interesting. And then sort of going on that idea of creativity, like do you feel like creativity, obviously there's so many different scales of it, but like do you think creativity is essential for the human experience? Like has it become an essential part of human life? And obviously creativity can be basically anything, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually put a couple of books over there because I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm going to be asked about this. And creativity has been a part of humanity forever. I mean, cave drawings
Yeah.
have had art. And so part of creativity is about storytelling and documenting stories, hence cave art. I'm also thinking of, since you're a psychology minor, I'm sure you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, on the base is like food, water, shelter, right? And I think art and all that stuff is like either not there or it's like kind of higher up, right? Because that's like intellectual.
Once you have other things covered.
Yeah. But when people are fleeing their countries, right, because of war, or when people are in their houses burning down, or when people are in crisis, people are not grabbing cans of food and jugs of water. People are carrying photo albums, or those who still have photo albums if it's not on their phone. People are carrying, they're leaving their houses carrying heirlooms or things that bring them comfort, like a stuffed animal, things that are important. So I think when I think of creativity, I think of all of those things speak to our humanity, and those are the things that are important to us. So while, yes, we need food and water and all those things to survive, those are not the things that keep us living. That's not what keeps us going as a species, or as just as people who gather in groups.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that makes total sense, even just the way you put it. Like, creativity can sort of be on any scale. It can be tiny, but also it can be on a larger scale, and so I mean that makes total sense. Like the idea of like even if like you have like a lockbox in your house, like of like we have like one of those like fireproof boxes in our house, and it's just like you have the things that like are essential and you really, really could not go without, because like it's the things that aren't replaceable. Like art is such a interesting thing, because it's like you can make it, but a lot of times it's just like you can't just like there's a reason why like the Mona Lisa, you can't just like recreate it and it's like the same exact thing. It's like there's so much history behind a lot of stuff. And then moving into sort of a bigger picture, deeper question that probably can't maybe be answered super well, but I figured I'd ask it because I think it's interesting. So what does it mean to heal in the sort of landscape of therapy? And is there such thing as like sort of fully healing from something?
Oh, wow. That
might be too difficult to answer in a concise format.
Wow. I'm going to avoid the question of can you fully be healed right now? Because I think that may depend on the person. But what does healing look like? Was that your first question? Healing looks like different things for different people, and it may depend on why somebody is coming in for therapy. So I'm thinking of the client that you mentioned, he came in, he was referred to me as a 9-year-old, and I never worked with kids that young before. But he was referred to me because he was in therapy for almost his entire life, was in and out in the foster care system, had really traumatic past, and verbal therapy wasn't working. So I forgot, maybe the 5th therapist or 6th therapist, whatever, in his like 9 short years of life. It's like, well, try art therapy. So of course I'm thinking, well, why do you think art therapy would work if nothing else was working? And I was told that in his other therapies, he would hide underneath the desk. And that was the session. So eventually with me, he never hid under the desk. He sat with me. So if we're thinking of healing and being able to sit with somebody, okay. So he's on his way, or that's what it's starting to look like. And eventually, he wouldn't make any art. So we could say, all right, the art therapy wasn't working. He wouldn't make any art, but eventually, at one point we started doing, working in sand tray. And that's another form of therapy that we can't really go into today, but we were doing sand tray work, and eventually he started and this was after like 2 or 3 years of work, he started telling stories with the miniatures about some of the trauma that he experienced.
Mm-hmm.
He started making drawings then to illustrate better the stories that he was telling in the sand. That was all in his chart, but that he never ever would speak to me about.
Mm-hmm.
And he started making these drawings about his past. He started talking to his new parents about his past, and at one point, his parents would catch him meditating in the back seat of the car
Mm-hmm.
when they thought that he was up to something that wasn't so
Mm-hmm.
good. And he's like, "Why are you looking at me? I'm meditating back here." So to me, that is what healing looks like shifting from one state that isn't working so well for you to a different state.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a very kind of fuzzy way of looking at healing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes healing looks like forgiveness. So whether it's forgiveness of yourself or forgiving people who have done you harm. And it doesn't mean like just allowing anything to go, but how do we let go of those things so it doesn't hinder ourselves and so we can move on, to live our full lives. And the art making can help
Mm-hmm.
with that.
Yeah, I mean, even just that example alone, I think is the perfect, like, if anybody's people who are listening to this, sort of like that kind of encapsulates the idea of art therapy, I think, pretty well, because it's like making you understand that it's like, it's a way to make progress in sometimes, like in a comparison to a traditional therapy that sometimes it's just like, you can't, because it's probably for the boy, it was just like, probably seems so intimidating. It's like yours probably seems much more like kind of low stakes and easier to enter, because it's like you said, like everybody can make art and it's so subjective too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you were saying that, it made me think a little bit more about like, what does healing look like? And I think the beautiful thing about art therapy is that oftentimes there's a tangible product. So unless you're a therapist who records every session verbally and then has your client listen to it and go back, which a lot of people don't do. But in art therapy, oftentimes the tangible object is saved or photographed. So oftentimes what I do with clients, whether it's during, after we've worked together for like 3 months or 6 months, like having some sort of regular check-in, or during times when we're really stuck, is looking at all the artwork created. Mm-hmm. So sort of like a gallery show, except, in therapy, and looking at everything and then seeing patterns and how things have shifted. And that's when a lot of times that I've seen how progress has been made and what healing looks like. Because then we can see, oh, what happened here? Why is this piece so different? Or can you see that everything looked a certain way here and then things shifted here? Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, right. That was that time when I started accepting my spinal cord injury diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Or that was a time when I got that job, and then that helps
sort of
us
like
understand.
Having a timeline even, and like knowing that like to that person, like even just a slight change in how the art was looking, like they know. And that's why it's like such a subjective thing, is like they can look and be like, oh yeah, this is where that happened. That's so interesting. And it's like another thing that I'm just like, didn't even think about. Like it's so fascinating. And then just moving on to getting right towards the end, this is a sort of random question that I don't know if this even aligns, but in my mind, when I was trying to wrap my head around art therapy, I see it. So obviously it's a form of therapy where it's just like a non-conventional or an unconventional form. So in my mind, I was like, since it's very centric around creativity, like, does it share any or have any like overlap with like psychedelic therapy? Is there any sort of overlap in that sense? Like, it just kind of, in my mind, like I don't know anything about either. So in my mind, I was like, is that like a thing that sort of overlaps because it's sort of being able to express yourself not using words? Like, does that make any sense?
Are you talking about psychedelic therapy in terms of like the new stuff that's happening now?
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any overlaps because I also have not experienced
I
that
figured
personally,
that's fair.
or
I just like
no,
I thought
nor
of
am
it,
I
I
a
was like, maybe I'll
practitioner.
ask.
But I do know that there are creative arts therapists, just like there are social workers and other therapists who are exploring that now as another way to unlock like different states of being.
Yeah.
But I guess, just again, off the cuff, not having studied that at all, my guess is the similarity would be this idea of getting to a state of being that we can't normally access. I mean, in theory, we should be able to access different states of consciousness without using psychedelics, right? And that could be through yoga, through breathing. Yeah. There's different ways that people achieve that. And same thing with art making. We don't necessarily need art to be able to find patterns in ourselves. It's just another way of getting. It's another method and another way of getting there.
That makes sense. I mean, I obviously, like, you not being like an expert on it, I just like thought it was interesting to ask. I think where I kind of saw the overlap from somebody who's like doesn't know anything about either, it's that idea of, like you were saying, like sort of like maybe it's able to unlock something that you're not able to sort of like you can't put into words. So it's a sort of way to like maybe get towards that like subconscious and like get towards things that you're maybe like repressing. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and I figured I'd ask because I don't know anything about it, and I thought it would be interesting. But yeah, getting towards the end, I figured the perfect way to end this is having you sort of verbally express back to the original question I asked, like how you're feeling now and how you feel like this interview went, and sort of like if you had to artistically portray how you're feeling now and like afterwards, like is there a change in how you feel?
Yeah, I feel relieved. This was a really great experience. I love the questions.
Thank you.
I wish I was able to be more articulate.
Oh, you definitely. I feel like I got took a class in this just in being with you. Like I feel like I really got, and I hope that people listening can really get that because there's so much that I mean most people just don't know about it. So every bit of information you gave is like wow, there's so much there.
Wow. All right. Well, in traditional or not traditional, in classic art therapy form, I would say, so this piece that I made where I folded the piece of paper in half and I opened it up and there was this beautiful thing, I would, how I feel now is I would probably rip up that piece of paper and maybe make something new with that piece. Maybe tear out all the white stuff, like the stuff that didn't get used, and the paint stuff, maybe making something else with it. So
I like that. I think that's the perfect way to end this. And I mean, I appreciate you taking the time out. It was awesome learning about. This is such an interesting thing that I never thought I would be speaking to someone about. So thanks to Dr. B also for connecting us together. And yeah, this has been the 22nd episode, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.